right, and we are live. Welcome back to another episode of the Endless Report. I'm Tony, and I'm joined by Ben once again. How's it going, Ben?
Pretty good. How about you?
Good to be back. We have a ton of news, both from last week and this week, to go over. So, as always, I think we should just get right into it. It's been a pretty big week, 2 weeks for gaming. Some good news, some bad news. I'm gonna jump right into last week's report since we weren't with you last week, and just kind of give a recap of what happened last week before we jump into this week's news, because I think that'll be a bit helpful. So last week we got a ton of things. There was a bit of a drought in the earlier week, but then we got a release date, maybe not a release date, a release window, and some gameplay for Gotham Knights to start off, which is pretty interesting. Again, this is not from the same studio who did the Batman Arkham series. However, that they're working on the Justice League game that's probably next year or so. But it is in that same universe where Batman is gone, and now you're playing as these other Batman universe characters like Nightwing and Robin and Red Hood. So and Batwoman, I believe. So very cool to see that reveal. If you want to check that out. Just to keep going, we also have EA FIFA news. So unfortunately, the FIFA name is no longer going to be attached to the series. There have been some disputes between EA themselves and the FIFA football organization worldwide about keeping the rights to the name. And I believe last year, the FIFA organization wanted a large amount of money for EA to keep these rights going forward. EA wasn't really sure that was worth the cost, and has kind of gone out and seeked out partnerships with the teams that they have been partnered for a long time, all FIFA related teams, as well as other leagues that are kind of worldwide football leagues. And they've gotten the support from most of the worldwide football community in that sense. So we're going to see the new game next year, probably going to be called EA Sports FC is the working title right now. That being said, I think FIFA 23 is still going to release this fall, and that'll be the last official FIFA title, at least in this context, that we'll see for some time. And other news, moving on, just to keep going through last week, PlayStation invested $300 million into quote unquote strengthening their first party software and deploying that software on multiple platforms. So, what exactly that means, to kind of give a brief kind of summary of that, we kind of think that means more so sticking to what they've done in the past with their first party kind of single player bread and butter releases that really are a staple of PlayStation Studios at this point, but also expanding into what we've talked about on past reports in terms of their live service strategies, strategies they have with that going forward. So I think this investment into more first party games, whether or not they're aiming for whether it's PC or cross platform games, when we talk about live services, remains to be seen. But we have seen PC ports of some of their single player titles in the past, so that's definitely on the table as well. But again, with those live service games, they have bought Bungie. They are other developers they have bought where we don't know. Maybe they make a game that's a PlayStation Studios title that, again, releases on Xbox as well. I mean, PC is the obvious, easier choice, given that they've ported some games there and still stayed away from the Xbox ecosystem. But then you have situations like MLB The Show, for example, which is more, again, on the lines of the MLB organization, similar to a FIFA thing where the sports organization had an opinion there. But again, that's a game that was traditionally a PlayStation Studios game, still is, but is now released on both Xbox and PlayStation. So it's curious to see what will happen with PlayStation there. We got some more news from them this week as well, so I'm sure we'll talk about that moving forward. We also had Nintendo in the news last week. They had an Indie World showcase, few games announced there. No Zelda or anything like that people are really cramming for in 2023, but some nice indie games from Nintendo last week as well, which you could check out. At the same time, they also dropped the price of the Switch for the first time in years. So that's actually going to be around $260 USD now, from around $300, which has been the case for some time, despite some sales back and forth. And almost done here with Nintendo. Still got some more news last week. They also announced that they have a major concern in that their next piece of hardware is very important to them, based on how the Switch has been performing so far. And different from PlayStation and Xbox, I think they're in a unique position right now where their hardware is a bit underpowered, although that's not really their main driving force. It's really their IPs, but the Switch is at a point where we've been talking about the Switch Pro for years. So the Switch is kind of showing off new games, including the new Zelda game, which I just mentioned, that is seemingly running on better hardware. Some people have said from the trailer, it seems like they're unsure how that's running that well on the existing Switch. So these Switch Pro rumors have been around for a few years. We're still not exactly sure, but Nintendo themselves have stated that they are concerned about their next console transition and how they're going to keep this Switch player base. So it's obvious that they're kind of having the same questions themselves and are figuring out how they're going to go about that. Other than that, unfortunately, we get probably the worst news that we've had all last week was that Starfield and Redfall coming from Xbox Bethesda have both been delayed into 2023. So I know we probably want to talk about that one a bit before we get into this week's news. I figured I'd leave that for the end because that was the kind of the big bad news on last week's Friday the 13th that we had. So I'd like to hear your thoughts again on some of this, Ben. I know I've been ranting about this for probably 2 minutes now. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know we talked about Starfield a lot. I know we're both fans of RPGs and those types of games, especially from Bethesda. So going forward for the summer for Xbox, PlayStation, I'd like to start the conversation there with that delay because I feel like that was quite a change in pace for the conversations we've been having.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things. When I first saw the news, I was like, "Oh, who's trying to pull a fast one on us?" And then you actually see, "Oh, wait, no, I found the source from Bethesda and Xbox themselves." That's disappointing because it was one of the big games this year that I was actually excited for. And I don't really get excited for a lot of games here recently. Um, but I would say ultimately, at the end of the day, as a player and as a developer, if the delay isn't resulting in any extra work and crunch for the people, and it really is just about like, we don't want a repeat of our last few games. We want this one to come out and just be like the top, like the best thing it can be, and it's not, again, not, you know, crunching and taking a, potentially burning a lot of people out to get there. Because a lot of people think delays make crunch not necessary, but you know statistically, when studios delay, it's usually, oh, they delayed it 6 months. Well, that's going to be a 6 month death march for the people actually working on it. But as a player, I would rather it delay and come out you know, uh, 6 months after when they said, if it comes out in May, or if they delay it a whole year to, November 11th, 2023. Again, as long as the people working on it are being treated fair, I can deal with the disappointment because especially if the delay was made to actually prevent any kind of crunch going on. My disappointment does not outweigh potentially people being worked to the bone. So
100%.
it's sad. It's sad.
Yeah.
But it's probably for the better. I mean, one of the first thing I thought of was, Cyberpunk. I think we talked about it a week or two ago. Like they hit like 1.5. They're kind of done fixing all the things that were wrong with it at launch. And it's like I've had a few friends play it, and they said it's actually pretty good. But again, that's an extra year plus after it launched. Like it did need that extra time. Even 6 months after it launched, it was better. So delays are sad, but
100%. I couldn't agree more with that. Especially, I mean, of course, Cyberpunk is that big elephant in the room when you think about the game delays that went that way, unfortunately. And I think that especially how you said it, is that there's this notion in the game, in the gaming community, at least from what I've seen, that when a game's delayed, everybody's either like, oh, I'm so mad that I'm not getting this game at this point, which is again 100% understandable. We're all excited to get the game that we're excited to play. But then it's the other argument is like, well, how dare you be disappointed because if the game's delayed, it's gonna be a better game, right? It's gonna be better for everybody. And it's like, well, we have to. Every situation's different. Every development team has their own practices. Every development cycle is different. But I think that, like you said, I'm hoping that this is for the better for both, not only the game, for the development team. I think that when you hear statements from Todd Howard in the past, the director of the team, who said that, I think I said this on the show a few times, how he quoted that date is not just written down, scribbled in pencil. That is set in ink. Like, we are very confident in that date, and we usually wouldn't release a date so far in advance, which we were really confident about that. And given the climate of, again, all these game releases, Cyberpunk most notably probably, but all these releases that we've had delays and have had those disappointments, it's a pretty bold move to say something like that, that we're that confident about setting a release date over a year out like that. So for them to say that, and with the history of, again, I mean, this is, again, going on like 10 years now, or I'm going back to Fallout 4 and Skyrim and Fallout 3 when I'm looking at comparisons, but they were always the studio that preferred to wait until the last minute to announce things. And we talked about this all already about, the marketing cycles of Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6 and how they had to announce that. So I feel like, again, that position that they've been put in now is tough. And then again, to then get to this point where we've heard rumors that maybe it wasn't as, clear set and the polishing stages ready to go right now as we and maybe imagined from those comments. Again, it's sad to hear that it's maybe not as ready as we wanted it to be. But again, if it's not, I would hate to see this become a crunch session for the rest of the year where this development team is under duress. And then we also still get a game after all this wait that is riddled by, issues and maybe has taken a toll on his team. I don't want this to be a negative. So if I have to wait till 2024 to get the ideal Starfield that was made in the right way and the team is happy and everybody's had, then so be it. But look, after waiting for so many years, it is one of those things where, we wish that we could have a magic wand to make game development just, make these games faster is what I hear a lot of people say. I wish these games could be made faster and that we don't have a 10-year gap in franchises and things like that. But again, as games get bigger, they get more labor intensive. We have more people working on them. We have Bethesda expanding their studios the past few years, and still games taking this long because they're just, putting a lot of time, love, and effort into these projects. And again, it's just one of those things where I could talk all day about how I wish it was this, or I wish I can get this game tomorrow, but it stinks to see, a delay again, but I'm excited to see more of that game. I think because of that, we're going to get more gameplay this summer. I really think that Xbox Showcase will still, even if they don't want to, give too early of a preview, I think they're going to have to after those delays. I think seems like what's on the docket. You have Phil Spencer kind of coming out and saying, well, it's not ideal. We respect our team's decisions to delay. We want to give the best games, but we realize that not having anything else on the docket, per se, to really fill that gap isn't always the best thing. And again, I know I'm kind of ignoring the elephant in the room that is Redfall as well. That was delayed, but that was one of those games where I wasn't sure we were going to see that this year to begin with. And I feel like Starfield was a little more of the shocker because of how, dead set and confident. It's one of the only games I can even think of right now that has a release date, let alone had that confidence, because everything is having that, this may be delayed kind of, aura in the air around it. So that's my thoughts. It's unfortunate. But again, we're gonna move forward because I think there's a lot of other things to look forward to here, and there are a lot of other things that maybe Xbox has up its sleeve. Maybe PlayStation can give us this year. Maybe Nintendo has this year that can really fill that gap. But it's a tough delay for me for sure. I was really excited for that game.
Yep. I do. The only other news item from last week that I did want to kind of touch on was the EA, the FIFA Sports. Because you brought it up, like about a year ago, FIFA kind of put out there that it was essentially a battle between EA and FIFA. Whose name were people coming to play? Was it the gameplay of the series and EA could do fine without the FIFA branding, or was it the FIFA branding that brought all the players? I personally just kind of expected that to be swept under the rug and a deal to be made and like, oh, everything's great. But having it go down like this is, fascinating to see, because that you will be able to test, if FIFA, because I think FIFA's like 60 or 70% of EA's revenue. Like, if they can keep if they can even keep like 45-50% of that, then I think EA was essentially correct in that assessment.
Yeah, and calling their bluff and kind of, we make this game.
Yeah.
Not FIFA, the name that is the entire. That's kind of the argument there, but 100%.
Yeah. So that'll be interesting, and I feel like EA's having a real rough time because they also lost the Star Wars exclusivity. So that is, and back-to-back years. Not great news for that.
Not the best news cycle for EA recently, 100%.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, but yeah, I think what you said there is that EA kind of called their bluff and said, you know what, because FIFA did make that statement a few times, FIFA is what they come for, and FIFA is most of your business. So what are you gonna do without us? And EA said, let's see. And it's a bold move. There are certain things that EA has done in games in the past. We talked about on this show a few times that I've not been a fan of every decision they made with that, but that decision I would, if I were them, I'd be happy with the decision. I stand by them in that and sticking to their guns of the game they make. maybe their player base, maybe, who are more passionate FIFA fans, maybe disagree with what I'm saying. But I think that if you can have that core FIFA experience and then focus more on improving that gameplay experience, while it seems like they already have the support of hundreds of clubs that really make up the core of what the FIFA game experience is, besides the World Cup, unfortunately, which is something you really can't get without full FIFA organization
Yep.
support. But when you have all these clubs signing on, you have the games going to stay virtually the same way, maybe even branch out and maybe let it liberate itself a bit without having some of the restrictions of the FIFA franchise that I'm not sure what those could have been, but maybe the FIFA organization had some restrictions there and how it was presented. This is me just completely talking out of left field. I don't know anything about what would have been restricted, but
Right.
I do think that there is something there that give them an opportunity to really let loose and just make their own game without the worries of this licensing being so
Yeah.
heavy and such a deal breaker for how every single piece of it has to go down. So I think if I'm a FIFA fan and I become aware of this and I say and I go to the store and next year, like, oh, it's EA FC, I know that it's EA game. Like, I think most FIFA fans know EA Sports. As for someone who I grew up in a big sports family as well. Even before I was someone who played video games, I would see my brother playing, Madden or whatever. It was EA Sports. It's in the game. That was always a big brand. EA Sports, has always been something that for even people who aren't a gamer or aren't, big into gaming, if you're a casual gamer, you probably know EA Sports still. So I think that if they can really say, you know what, us as a brand ourselves we think we're valuable and really push that forward and kind of bring back that EA Sports persona they used to have without those intros that they always used to have before their games. I think that you could really have something there. So I agree. I think it's an interesting kind of battle that's going on between those two properties, but it remains to be
Yeah.
seen.
And I mean, I'm not a fan of either organization
Mm.
really. So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how it goes either way. And then if EA is correct in this assessment, then what does that mean for the NFL license? If
Mm-hmm.
EA could work out a deal with all the individual teams and cut the NFL out.
And that's even easier to do than the FIFA licenses because you're talking about hundreds of clubs, different countries, different
Yep.
leagues versus NFL is you get these owners on board. And I don't know how that will work with the NFL's legislation. Maybe the NFL has something in place where they wouldn't be able to do that without the NFL signing off. But I'm not. Maybe there's it's a tight ship there
Yep.
in terms of how that works with team licensing. But that would be huge. And I think something
Yep.
you have games like, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Blitz the League, which was a Lawrence Taylor's game back in the day with the big hits and the bone break, tackles and stuff like that. So if you could have a football game that maybe was a little more loose with the way, its mechanics, or just had more, in-depth mechanics than the same Madden every year for the past 20 years. Like I kind of was insinuating there with FIFA again, if you could kind of let this be a time to really refocus what the game is in general and kind of lean back from, not that you don't need these licenses. They understand that the licenses are what they need to make these games work. But I think if you could step back from that a little bit and really focus on the football game, whether it's, traditional football or American football, that game, make that game perfect. I really think that the fans will follow. I think that there are already fans of these games that just buy these games and maybe this game and Call of Duty and one other every year. There are a lot of people I know that just, they buy FIFA, Madden, NHL, and that's their yearly pickup for video games. So I don't think that audience is going to disappear. I don't think that the lack of FIFA support as internationally is going to make the FIFA gamers who are spending all this money on those microtransactions that EA loves just disappear out of nowhere. I still think they're going to be buying Ultimate Team packs and doing all the things they want to do unless they really miss out on having those FIFA teams and properties, which I don't think they will. It seems like they're going to have all of that content there. So at the end of the day, I really think that EA has a sound strategy here of just kind of going on their own, although it is going to be a challenge, and it'll be interesting to see that next year for sure.
Yeah.
But
And
I think,
I mean, my last thought on that, and hopefully we'll
yeah,
get to explore this, more one day. And you brought it up is that, with NFL and FIFA kind of being licensee brand, essentially we've talked about advertising before and how advertisers don't like, they have a lot of restrictions on what you can do with their logo and their branding, and that is it's probably something that a lot of people don't think about is like, yeah, EA might just be trying to cheap out a little bit by essentially releasing football every year, just updated team rosters. But there also could be a lot more behind the scenes we don't know about, as far as the NFL saying like, oh no, you can't do, you can't actually have injuries because we don't want our brand associated with breaking bones or anything like that. But now, if or using FIFA as an example, maybe they had that same rule, like they could be injured, but you can't go into any detail, you know. But
Yeah,
if you start getting maybe you open up that opportunity for a bit more of a sim take on it, where your players actually get injured and it can, the details of the injury can persist, and there is a lot of room that gameplay could potentially open up depending on what those restrictions, you know, from a licensor or a licensee are. So it's it's
100%.
it's going to be fascinating. I mean, if they just release the same thing, then cool. We know it was just EA doing EA's thing, but if they do get that room to free up, then it will put a lot of eyes on other branded sports games in particular.
100%.
So,
I think, like you said, there are restrictions. There could be a certain image of the way the game works and the simplicity of the way the teams work to kind of keep it in certain bounds of having that image of a typical NFL game. Whatever that may be. But in terms of like injuries, like you said, that's a great example. I think of injuries in Madden where it's kind of a one-off thing and it's more statistics based and it's not really something that kind of like you treat on versus the game Blitz the League I mentioned before. I mean, there are many games where you're giving players like shots in their leg to get back on the field. Like it's kind of more of a goofy sense of the reality in that game. But if you could find, take liberties in other areas of the game to kind of give different levels of sim experience to people that they would want, I really think, and just improved physics, general things that are just gameplay things that are really aren't there in the gameplay system now. I really, and have those options for the traditional Madden experience if it's Madden, or have this different version. I think that that's something that could really be cool. And again, it's something that just they never. I'll leave it at that. They never really had to do that. So it's like
yeah.
they're in a position now where they're already having things shaken up. They're having their status quo challenged a bit, if you will. So I think that this is the time to really reinvigorate yourselves. It's a new generation. We're getting into a time where gaming is evolving in ways we've never seen before, and you still have sports games playing the same way they did on the PlayStation 1. And you know what I'm saying? I think there's really not. I'm not knocking sports games that they never evolved. These games have been the same games, in reality, real sports for all this time. I'm not saying you have to redefine the wheel when it comes to football, baseball, soccer, anything, but I do think that there are totally ways you can improve the physics and the game systems of many of these lifelong franchises that have just kind of been the same game improved year by year. I do think that there's definitely an opportunity for even EA, or another studio to just say, let's just take 2-3 years, or not, maybe not even off, maybe have a team working on Madden, maybe take another studio and let's develop a new engine for this sport or for this franchise. I'm surprised they haven't done that ever, like in a long time. I mean, I'm no expert on how they've iterated their games every year. So I'm sure that there has been a lot of graphical improvements, physics improvements gradually over the years. 100%. I'm not saying that whatsoever, but I do think if you really took a time to reinvent what that process was, it would really spark a new era of sports games. And I think sports gamers everywhere would be really happy to get something fresh and new going forward. But
Yeah, I mean, again, I hate truly the last thing. We're talking about EA's take on being able to do things differently, but you also have to look at now FIFA can shop the FIFA brand around to other studios. They don't have to be. It doesn't even have to be another like AAA studio. You could have essentially a AA developer that could get the license and do something really cool with it, depending on how much control FIFA is having over the safeness of the game. So again, the next year to 2 years will be really interesting to see what
yeah,
happens in that sports realm as a fallout from this in so many ways. And I don't
yeah,
play
and
sport games, but it'll be fascinating.
I haven't played as much as I used to either, and I think that I used to play much more sports games when I was younger, and I think that a lot of the fun of things like Backyard Baseball, I'm not sure if you've heard of that franchise before, where it was all MLB players, but you're playing a cartoon game and you make your own character. I think that there are so many opportunities for games like that to happen. If, like you said, FIFA or other sports organizations shopped out their properties and their teams and what they owned, I think that you don't have to have just, if say football, American football, for example, you don't need just Madden and maybe like a Madden street mode in the game and nothing else in the market. You could have, like one of those 3v3 games or a smaller developer who gets the rights to some NFL, players and can make a smaller, fun kind of street football game, a more arcade type game that isn't really specifically an NFL game sim. It doesn't have to be so limited in scope of what sports games could be. I mean, there are more and more sports, games like that every year. I know everybody's golf has been particularly popular recently as a golf game, but it's kind of more of an arcadey golf game. But I don't think we see a lot of that with some of these, these big team sports anymore, like basketball, football, baseball. I think that'd be really cool to see more of those mini game type things. I mean, I think of mini games like that, and I think of Nintendo with Mario baseball, Mario golf. I think of them putting out properties like that actually do really well. And I know that that's not maybe the expected thing from some of these studios, but I do think that would do really well if they tried to branch out it back into, especially EA Sports. They used to have the street games, NFL Tour, where they were more laid back, kind of more like, acrobatic type, fun arcadey sports games. And I really think those would thrive in this market with updated graphics and physics and everything like that. But I digress. I could talk about the potential of that all day, literally all day. But I'd like to move on to some more stuff that happened this week. We got a few stories this week as well. Jumping into PlayStation again, PlayStation Plus has given us some new details on the service. We've talked about this a few times in the past week since they've announced it, but it's coming soon. June 13th, again, is the official date. And they've finally given us an official list of all of the PlayStation Plus games and kind of what's going to be going on here. So I'm going to scroll down a bit through this article. We could take a look at that list real quick, but a lot to go off here. So I could kind of scroll through this all day, but we have basically the full list of PS5 and PS4 games here that are going to be on the service. So again, before I go through this list, to kind of put it in context for those who are watching, this is not necessarily a response to Xbox's Game Pass service, but it is inherently a very similar idea in which PlayStation Plus is kind of incorporating the PlayStation Now of the past, where their game streaming capabilities, as well as some of their PlayStation Plus library, into one big type of streaming, slash Xbox Game Pass kind of service. So it's not exactly a competitor according to them, but it's a very similar archetype here. So starting off with the base PlayStation 4 and PS5 games, just to say a few, I mean, we have most of what we expect from the PlayStation Plus collection already with games like Days Gone. We do have Demon Souls, which is a nice addition, a launch game for the PS5. Bloodborne, Death Stranding, Ghost of Tsushima, God of War, Horizon, Infamous, Knack, Gravity Rush. These are all the expected franchises we'd have from PlayStation here. Although some that we haven't gotten in the past, like Gravity Rush on the PS Vita and the PS4 versions of that. I'm not sure we're on PS Now to begin with, so there are some additions here. But then again, mostly all of these PlayStation first-party games, again, The Last of Us, Until Dawn, Uncharted, Returnal, not to name every game on the list there, but about what you'd expect from the PlayStation first-party PS4, PS5 games. But is there any, I don't know if there's any surprises there for you, Ben. I think that's about what I think.
I mean, not really. It feels like PlayStation's doing what PlayStation does best. It is relying on its first-party roster. Games Pass is a lot of third-party titles. There are obviously everything Microsoft is doing is coming out, but again, Microsoft's been having a bit of a struggle getting games out. I feel like this is going to lead to like a really chaotic 2-year period where everything they had in the works just comes out in like a 2-year stint of like 8 games. But until then, Games Pass is a lot of third-party and indie games, and PlayStation's coming out with like, their first-party list is going to be, the stars of the show, and they've got some third-party games on there, notably Valhalla, which is interesting to me.
And I'll pull those up now because I didn't even get to the third-party games. That was just their first game. So absolutely, I don't want to act like they only have first-party. So here's the third-party list as well. I'll pull that up. But yeah, you have Valhalla, you have Ashen, interesting. You have Celeste, City Skylines, Control, Ultimate Edition. A lot of these games already have appeared in certain instances, whether PS Plus or the PlayStation Collection. But Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy, that's a recent title. That's pretty notable. Red Dead Redemption 2, The Crew 2, Resident Evil, Outer Wilds, NBA 2K22. So there are some interesting third parties there as well. But again, I'm sorry to cut you. I just want to make sure that I made that clear as well.
No, I mean, I was just saying, I mean, I know in the last few weeks, we talked about Ubisoft potentially being eyed by some people who might want to pick it up. And I saw at one point a rumor, I have no idea for how credible it is, but there was some talk that Sony might be looking at picking up Ubisoft. And then obviously they announced that, Valhalla is going to be in this, and it sparked, a lot of people, we were right. You know,
There are some talks there, at least there's something going on. I guess it gets
yeah.
the rumor mill churning a bit for sure.
But no, I mean, if you look at the list, the first party title list is almost twice the length of the third party list.
Hmm.
So I mean, again, it's Sony doing what they do best, and they are leaning on their first party titles to really make this value for money, which isn't bad. I mean, if I haven't played most of those because I've had a PlayStation 4 for a while, but the only games I played on it were Ghost of Tsushima and Spider-Man, the first one. Um, so I mean, if I was so inclined, that might be a really great deal for a month or two, and just like knock out some of those PlayStation 4 games that
Hmm.
looked good. I just never really felt like spending $40 to $60 to buy.
100%.
So
Yeah. And I think as someone who I personally played a lot of, I mean, I've had a PlayStation 4 and now PS5, and I've played a lot of the first party titles just because it's kind of a game genre. I wouldn't want to say genre, but kind of types of games I'm really gravitate towards in terms of, I'm talking God of War, Spider-Man, Ghost of Tsushima, Uncharted, all these serious third person narratives. They have long narrative structures. And those games are really right up my alley. And I guess that's why I love these PlayStation first party titles. But I guess from my perspective, I think, yeah, this is great. I love that, I'm not getting a lot of new things per se from me because I played a lot of their first party titles, but I am getting some interesting third party here. I am getting pretty much most of the first party titles that I haven't played that I would want to try out for free and maybe wanted to spend, again, 40, $60 on. Then again, I'm going to scroll down here because we do get into some of their older games. So when we go back to not only just their PlayStation plus lineup, excuse me, the PlayStation Now lineup that we could stream earlier, but also some new additions from the PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 era. And unfortunately, this is where I feel like the lineup gets a little bit shaky. And I know that PlayStation has had conversations about their backwards compatibility capabilities. It's a little bit of a tongue twister there. Their backwards compatibility capability in the past. But I do think that there is a little left to be desired here. There are some great titles here. I mean, if we're going back to like classic PlayStation games, we have Ape Escape, Hot Shots Golf, Siphon Filter, which is really interesting. Super Stardust, Tekken 2, Jumping Flash. Then we have some more remaster games, including Ape Escape 2, the Dark Cloud series, the Jack series, Jack 2. Again, they don't have. This is where my problem is. They have the Jack series here, and they have Jack 2, Jack 3, and then Jack Combat Racing. But sometimes, and the Precursor Legacy, actually, I'll take it back. They do have all of them. They were out of order. But there are a few others here, like I believe it's Killzone. Yeah, some infamous games where they don't have most of the series. So they have some sequels here, like Ninja Gaiden, Sigma 2. They don't have Ninja Gaiden, Sigma 1. There are a lot of series here that are Resistance 3. They don't have Resistance 1 and 2. So there are a lot of series here that are, again, cool titles, great titles. They have some of the Ratchet and Clank titles here. Again, not all of the Ratchet and Clank series. So I think if you're going to have this ecosystem where you want people to jump into the PlayStation Plus collection and get all these titles, you want people to jump into now all the way back to PS3, PS2, PS1, and become fans of these franchises that you're maybe going to either have a sequel come out for or a remake or what have you. And if you only have, for example, Resistance 3, I played Resistance very briefly back in the PS3 era. I was never a big Resistance fan, but they were really good games. But if I wanted to jump back into that series, I couldn't start at the beginning of the story. I would have to just either find Resistance 1 or 2 in some other form on disc and maybe get another PlayStation console, or figure that on my own, or just say I'm gonna start with Resistance 3 and forget about starting from the beginning and really going through the story. So unfortunately, I think while PlayStation does a really good job here of kind of hitting a lot of the franchises you maybe wouldn't expect at first thought, I do think that they could do a little bit better of rounding out their collection. Because if you think about it, like how I would think about Game Pass going forward is you want to be not just a streaming service, but a subscription service that's giving content every month. So you not only need new content. If I look at something like Netflix, you not only need new content every year, but you also need for your libraries to be substantial in terms of no one wants you to watch just one random sequel movie on your streaming platform. No one wants to watch just Indiana Jones 3 and nothing else. I mean, you'd want to have a whole library of a franchise to be like, this is the home of this franchise, So I think that when you're PlayStation, and it's not even like you're a TV, streaming service, we have to debate with production companies and get the residuals and the rights to these programs. It's like, these are your games. You have the rights. I almost feel like there's it's kind of dropping the ball there when you don't have all of those games ready to go. And again, when it comes to games, I'm sure there's a technical reason why certain games weren't ready as soon as the other ones, but I think that a priority should be filling out the series that you are providing first before you start providing more older games. I think that if you come out with a sequel and not the original, I think it's tough for someone who hasn't been a PlayStation gamer and wants to jump into PlayStation Plus and think that they can get into PlayStation gaming and then realize, oh, I'm going to have to actually buy a PS2 or PS3 if I actually really want to play this series for what it's worth. So I think that's something to consider with those games.
Yeah, I mean,
For
I'm
sure.
looking at this expanded list after the first party, third party, and then their 2 hour trial list. Everything after that, it does nothing for me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not a huge fan of. I don't have anything against older games. I just typically don't feel the desire to go back. Although I will say, if they announce like, "Hey, we're going to do a Resistance 4, on PlayStation 5, we're going to let an internal team do that because it's an IP we've had for ages." That might be interesting. But then, yeah, all I can do is play the third one, and why would I bother? I could pull up a YouTube video and I watch a story
Mm-hmm.
synopsis in 30 to 45 minutes, and okay, cool, I'm caught up,
Yeah.
and it would be
And
free.
And that's I'd probably feel the same way in that scenario. And then there's the other person I think who would maybe say, no, I need to go complete everything, or I need to play every game myself. And that kind of person too, I don't think this is for either of us. That kind of person that we're thinking and that person, because if you're the person again who just would rather watch YouTube video and you can't have access to the games, you're not going to go back and go through all the hassle, like you said, to do that. And if you're the kind of person that is, you probably don't even really want to pay for this service in the first place because you may have a PC. Again, I'm assuming here, or you may have these old consoles where you've either played these games already, or you'd want to go back and play it that way and in the right way if that's really that important to you. So I look at games here like Fear, No Fear 2, whatever. That's at least the original. Or again, like Resistance 3 is probably the best example there, but Infamous, Eco is actually a great game to be on there. But these are games that not all of these. Eco is probably the worst example because that's a game that's hard to play off of PlayStation platforms. But other games here, I look at and I think, man, like you could probably just do it. Just you probably wouldn't go through PlayStation Plus subscription as the first reason for playing these games. These are all, again, I'm not like you said, I'm not knocking on older games by any means. I'm aware of pretty much every single one, almost every game in this list that has come out. I just think that most people are excited for what's new, and for the people that are going to go back, I think you may just have PlayStation Plus and say, great, I have that collection if I want to. But if you're the kind of person who's actively looking back for older games, you're probably going to want to just go and acquire these games anyway. For me, as someone who pays $60 a year for PlayStation Plus, do I really want to pay, double that or maybe a little less, 80, 90, depending on the tier I'm going to pay for these collections to get maybe one or two games that I really want to play from old, when they're also giving me the option just to buy these games out right now? Because I'm pretty sure, and I'll correct myself if I'm wrong, but I did read here that these games are now all going to be integrated into the PlayStation Store outright. So if you're not paying for PlayStation Plus, all these, these retro remaster games coming back can still be downloaded if you pay them at a certain full price. So it may be worth it just to pay a certain full price for one or two games every once in a while when you really want one of these, than to pay the subscription price every year. So when you come to why they'd even be doing this in the first place, it would be for the value proposition. And I don't think that they really can match what Game Pass is doing right now, even if they're saying they're not trying to. Again, I know I'm not trying to say it's the direct competitor, but they're not really giving an alternative that is so much more, even that much more viable in its own right, unless you're someone who really just has no PlayStation game experience and you really want to jump in and play a lot of these, again, PS4, PS5 era. I think the last 10 years or so is pretty safe in that regard. But when you get to these older games, I don't think it's something that's very helpful in terms of saving money and getting the best bang for your buck in terms of that experience. So I do think going forward, both Game Pass and PlayStation needs to work on that, because we've talked about it before and we'll get into it later, but now you have Xbox. So again, I said before, when you have a streaming service who has no new games coming out for this year either, you have to rely on that backlog, and Xbox has a very good backlog as well. So I think that you don't want to just be relying on your backlog. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now in just terms of gaming in general. If PlayStation doesn't even have this service yet, and we're already kind of sitting in this kind of unfortunate drought, I would say. I mean, they had Horizon earlier this year, which was, came out with critical acclaim. It was a really beautiful game, got all good reviews. But then you have Elden Ring released basically a week later, maybe less than a week later, and that's just you're not getting any coverage after that whatsoever with the way that game launched and just took over the media. So it's kind of unfortunate to see both PlayStation and Xbox be in the spot right now, but I do think, again, we've been kind of sitting here on the precipice of these summer showcases where I think a lot of the tides will change, and the mood about the direction we're going into, I think, will switch a bit. But it's kind of funny how this stuff kind of switches on a dime with one delay or one announcement when you don't have a lot of these bigger game releases to really fill the conversation like usual.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's about all I'll say for that PlayStation Plus. But if I can hop out here, moving on to Netflix. Speaking of Netflix, I'm gonna see if I can pull this article up real quick. Netflix has been in talks to actually expand their game streaming services as well as their live streaming capabilities. So I'm gonna pull that article up here. Um, we talked about it I think 1 week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, about how Netflix has been interested in their game streaming services, and plan to have about 50 games on their service by the end of the year. Right now, they have dabbled in game streaming in terms of some mobile type games being on their service. They've also, of course, dabbled in the gaming industry by investing in, franchises like The Witcher, League of Legends, and what have you. So it is obvious that for a while Netflix has been trying to capitalize on the gaming market. But today we have this announcement that Netflix considers adding live streaming capabilities to the service. So I'm sure we both here have some theories about what exactly that means and exactly how they're going to use that. Again, that could be integration into their shows. It could be gaming related. We don't know exactly what their plans are there, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a logical step to move into. I know, I mean, they have to have a lot of the infrastructure already set up to be able to support it, um, or at least a lot of the knowledge and understanding of how to set it up and the resources to set it up. It makes sense they want to diversify since they're having some, they are having some struggles. Um, it could be really interesting. I mean, especially if I feel like I read somewhere that Netflix is going to be also doing first party titles. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and Twitch has Twitch integrations for games. It I could see a world where you get some really awesome integration stuff with Netflix. If you are watching a live stream of a game, uh, I know at one point Stadia touted the idea of being able to like watch the streamer play, and then you click a button, and then you're like, bam, you're right in the game too. Like, I could see Netflix being able to do something like that if everything is offered, through their service. If you're watching the game through their service, and you would play the game through their service, and if it is just like part of the subscription, then yeah, I mean, there's a world where that is an option. So I think I think YouTube and Twitch could always use some more competition. So having you know uh, having a competitor wouldn't will never be a bad thing. Especially from a user perspective, it will hopefully force the other to up their game. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think that especially in the context of what's going on with Netflix right now, I mean, you mentioned how, their struggles in the past few weeks. I mean, they had a lot of their company leave after their stock fell. And again, a lot of people had stock options. They were working there. So that was a pretty rough few weeks for Netflix recently. And now they have a few more announcements about subscriber drops, after that whole initial panic about subscriber drops that led to that. So it just hasn't been a good few weeks for them. That being said, I hope that this seems like something that they've been working on for quite a while. I'm not sure if this is a direct reaction to what's been going on in the past few weeks, but I do think that it could be a direct benefit in terms of them diversifying themselves and kind of giving themselves more value afterwards here. So I think about, again, like when I say, maybe not reactive, but I mean that in the case that they've had properties in the past. Again, they've had this gaming focus in the past, both with The Witcher and the Arcane shows that they've promoted a lot, and have obviously wanted to get into the gaming community and those IPs. And they've also had their game streaming services. So it's not like this comes out of left field. And I do think, like you said, when you have that interactive element, like a Twitch stream where people are, telling, like you've seen those Pokemon or Skyrim streams where people are telling exactly what commands to put in and what to do next. That definitely is something that could work with a live streaming platform. And when you have Netflix already having this experience and that kind of choose your own adventure programming, which they've done before, or they've had, the first one that comes to mind is the Black Mirror Bandersnatch special, which they had a Black Mirror episode where you chose what the character did and that affected what happened next in the story. And to have a choose your own adventure book type, show is something that's very, if you can get somewhere to blur that line between TV and gaming, and I think the more you blur that line and engines get better. I mean, we look at games like right now, The Quarry is an example of this kind of a spiritual successor to Until Dawn and a lot of the Dark Pictures anthology series. Those games that are almost like these mini movies where you're making choices and then it affects how the scenario plays out. But you have real actors, you have great motion capture and great graphics, and it really feels like you're living in a horror movie. And if Netflix can figure a way to get that kind of experience, maybe integrate into a movie experience, or maybe integrate with digital effects. I don't know how they would do that per se, but also have all of this community interaction and maybe a live stream format where you have all these people weighing in at the same time. That could be a really, really cool experience. And I think that that's a really interesting kind of niche multimedia experience. And I think everything's kind of leading towards, when you look at it, I think everybody's realizing that they need to get into multimedia experiences. I think every media organization that isn't focusing on gaming is now looking again at gaming because they're realizing how integral gaming is to a lot of the future of entertainment, I think. And again, I'm getting very grandiose with this analysis of it, but I do think that is the future. I think it's the future of a lot of things. I don't think traditional mediums are going away or anything, but I do think interactive media is going to continue to evolve in ways, especially like that, where you're having these audience type events when it comes to both live streaming movies or games, what have you. So it's exciting to see. I don't think it's just like a last minute, effort by Netflix to figure out some new idea because of they're in shambles. I don't think that I've gotten that, contact, what's the word? I've gotten that insinuation. I can't think context, whatever, from some people that I've seen reporting on this news. And I'm not sure that's exactly the case. I don't think it's that reactive. I think it's just the way we're hearing it, publicly, it kind of comes off that way, but I don't think connotation would be the word, but I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, no, I mean, something like this, if there's any weight behind it, something like this has definitely been in the works and probably planned from their initial desire to push into gaming. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I would be, absolutely flabbergasted if this was something that like they just thought of in the last month to try and
Oh yeah.
create a new
Mm-hmm.
lifeline. Like, again, we've talked before, but companies in general have a lot of numbers, have a lot of data. Netflix especially, like they've probably known for months that like they were on this verge of losing a lot of subscribers. Like, none of that is should be, hopefully, shocking to the people that have that data. So I I feel like consumers in general have this feeling that a lot of this stuff is like spur of the moment decision making,
Mm-hmm.
when like the reality is I would bet 9 out of 10 times decisions like this have been in the works for several months at minimum.
Mm-hmm.
um, and it might be something that the articles may consider adding it, and it might be something that 6 months ago they started essentially internally working on some proof of concepts, setting up you know the internal capability to do it and test it out and see if it's technically feasible for them with what they've got and what they feel like they can do. But we're just now hearing about it, and it's one of those things. They might not be committed to actually doing it
Mm-hmm.
still, but like the idea has. There's no way the idea is like fresh.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
100%. And that's all I kind of want. I 100% agree with you there. That's just kind of why I wanted to say that, because I feel like a lot of times, same thing when you get these news reports back to back, it just seems like people react immediately like, oh, because of this or doing this. And it's like they have a lot of internal conversations going on that you're not really privy to. And I feel like people kind of jump the gun with that and don't assume that these are long standing things. And I guess it's just more of the gaming commentary I see and stuff like that. And I think it's always important to note that these things do take time and a lot of effort to get to your Twitter screen or
yeah,
whatever you're reading that for the first time. But
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, unless you're a
mhm.
really small company, things don't move nearly as fast as you would think they do in business.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of things not moving fast, I was gonna bring this article up, but I think this is a brief one. I'll just touch on real quickly. Is unfortunately we have another delay this week. Kerbal Space Program 2 has been delayed for the third time now. Unfortunately, it was supposed to come out in 2020. Again, I mean COVID, of course, I'm sure put a wrench in that 2020 release date. It was supposed to come out 2021 for the first delay. That didn't happen. Second delay to 2022. Now that's not happening again. So now we have a third delay here coming to 2023. Hopefully the third time's a charm there. Hopefully we'll see that game soon. Not really much more to comment on there. I just wanted to put that out there because that is, a game that a lot of people are looking forward to. I haven't played Kerbal Space Program myself, unfortunately, but it did seem like a really cool game. I think it's something that really a lot of people are fans of, especially people who love modding, messing around with games, like things like that. I think that's a really notable game to mention. So unfortunately that's been delayed, but hopefully we'll see more of that going forward. But in some better news, we've actually had a surprise release of a game this week, which was something that you don't see too often these days. So jumping into that, we have an article here about Arma 4. So Arma 4 has been announced to be officially in development by Bohemia Interactive, the developers of the Arma series. So Arma 4 has not been released this week, but they have released a game called Arma Reforger. So essentially what Arma Reforger serves to do here is kind of be a bridge from Arma 3 to the new title Arma 4, which will be coming soon, I believe in a year or so. They're not clear on the release date there yet. But essentially, Reforger is the new engine built up for Arma 4, but kind of taking the old map from older games and basically creating a sandbox for players to get used to this new engine, start modding in this engine, and start getting accustomed to the ways this engine works and the ways they can manipulate it. So to give some context there for anyone watching who's not familiar with the Arma series, Arma series has been one that's been very popular on PC in the past, but I feel like many people I've talked to, at least from my age, my friends, that aren't aware of it for one reason or another. And it's funny because the Arma series has been a home to modding for a long time. So it is a military simulator with a large map, a lot of military tools at your disposal, weapons, things like that, and games that people would most definitely know popularly have started from mods on Arma. So that includes DayZ, which is a very popular zombie survival title that many people would know that started as an Arma mod and ended up becoming its own standalone game. That developer went out, built Arma, that built that Arma mod again from the ground up in its own, place. And now DayZ has been a popular game, very popular streaming game for years. Come back with that with another popular streaming game that also essentially started an entire genre that goes all the way up to the most highest grossing franchises in gaming, which is PlayerUnknown. PlayerUnknown was originally a modder for Arma who created a Battlegrounds mod, which was essentially the first battle royale mod. I mean, maybe not the first actual battle royale game, but the first one that really took off. And this PlayerUnknown's battle royale, Battlegrounds ended up becoming its own game as well, which ended up inspiring the battle royale genre to where it is today. And you wouldn't really have Fortnite or COD Warzone or any of these like behemoths without this Arma 3 mod. So I do think that a new Arma engine coming out and these mod tools being opened, and I believe that you told me earlier, Ben, that they're basically opening up C# programming in this new engine, which will make it a lot easier for people to get into programming and changing behaviors in this engine very quickly. So I do think that this could be a bridge for not only more creative concepts to come out, but for a lot of younger new game developers who are just getting into game development to have this tool here to really, flex their creativity and get them interested in other types of development, maybe other engines. Like you said earlier, I think that's a very, very cool idea.
Yeah, and I mean it's great to see a company realizing where one of their biggest strengths is, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic idea to release this smaller title with essentially the full tool set. Obviously, they'll probably still keep adding stuff as they make the full Arma 4 as they find things they need to add. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a brilliant move. I mean, it's one of those things where they clearly know a large factor of their success is their community and the modding
Mm-hmm.
capability. So it's one of those things like, yeah, in my opinion, I've played Arma. I played Arma 1 and Arma 2 a long time ago. It's not my cup of tea, but from a business standpoint, from a PR standpoint, this is just it's a master stroke. Like they are I honestly can't find anything wrong with it.
Yeah, and I think the way I describe Arma, at least from my experience playing it, I've played it as well briefly a few years back, more so. But my first instinct would probably be overwhelming, and I don't mean that in a bad way because it's so realistic. I mean, to the point where you need to really take time and really learn every mechanic of this game. And people who are used to playing on PC, maybe if you played MMORPGs or MOBAs or any more, any strategy game where it's more in depth. I think you'd be a little more accustomed to this. But if you're typically a console shooter gamer, say you're a Call of Duty gamer, you play Battlefield, and you're like, I want to try out Arma. It's a very disorienting experience at the beginning. And I'm showing this trailer here on the side here. So they showed how they were taking the original Arma and now porting those original assets into this new engine here, just to give some context for that trailer. But I think, as you can see here, I mean, there's an open map in Arma. You're very reliant on knowing where you are, knowing how to coordinate yourself, coordinate with your other troops like you are a real military force. I mean, there are times where you're using your compass, on a raw level, and you have to really balance the compass in your hand and see where you're going. It's not just an artificial compass, like in other games that you'd have. You have to find the, not just voice chat channels for other teams like some games have, but radio signals to actually find on your radio in the game what certain battalions are talking on and if it's encoded or not. It gets very, very real and in depth. And for someone I'm not the best when it comes to being really good at those kind of games where they're really in depth like that, and it takes a lot of real life focus. But I think if you're the kind of gamer that likes like role playing and really feeling like you're in this world, I think there's not many other games like that when it comes to simulators. It really is something interesting. So I think when you open all that up to modability, there's the limits are endless. to not make a pun there, it really is endless opportunities there for what you could do with those.
Yeah, I mean, Arma is pretty much, it is the benchmark in military sim games. Like Microsoft Flight Simulator is the benchmark for flight simulators. And if Microsoft Flight Simulator, you know exactly what it's about. And it's exactly that, but for military sim. It's, way beyond me, but, for the people that want that experience, you literally cannot get better.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things where, especially like I'd probably agree there. It's probably not for me about how in depth it gets and how really committed you can be to how you get into that simulation. And I really like that stuff, but again, it may just be a little much for me at times in terms of how much time I'm willing to commit to it. But that being said, I love that it exists, and I think it's such a cool thing for those who want to get into that kind of stuff. But maybe moving on a bit to some other announcements we have. We have a bit more time here. I think we're gonna go for about we're hitting the hour mark here. If we could try to hit maybe another 23 minutes here, I think that'll be good. But I think if we could try to get through, we have 2-3 more stories here I'd like to touch on really quickly. So starting off with something that we've been talking about a bit in the past in terms of what could supplement this Starfield and Redfall delay. So looking back at Xbox and Bethesda, we have a leak here where, believe it or not, once again, we may have another port release for Skyrim. So last year at the 10th anniversary of Skyrim, we got the anniversary edition. Most notably, it came included with the Creation Club content and some other updates for the game, bringing it, into a bit of a more modern setting. That being said, it did not release on Switch at the time, and we are now getting rumors, not just rumors, we are getting official ratings from a Taiwanese ratings board that has said that the game has been rated for Nintendo Switch, and we can expect it probably sometime this year, given it's already been rated at this point. So I'm not sure exactly when we'll see that and what context, if it will be exactly the same anniversary edition compared to the one that was released last year for consoles. Again, I'm not sure how they'll adapt that to be handled on the Switch hardware. The original release of Skyrim on Switch has been, I believe, on Switch since launch. So I'm not sure. Again, we'll get some improvements there. We'll get the survival mode and some other features that were included in that Creation Club content with this release. But other than that, I'm curious to see technically how we're going to get any improvements or if we will at all when it comes to those, because the Switch is still running on hardware that, again, is a bit outdated when it comes to how many years it's been out now and how outdated the hardware was at the time. So, and just its form factor and everything about the Switch. So we talked about this a bit earlier in the show with the Switch Pro rumors, concerns about Nintendo's thinking about it, but clearly they're also still going full steam ahead with these releases. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well, both in context of that and just in context of, again, that Xbox, filling that void here this fall?
I mean, it's one of those things where I'd be hard pressed to say it's really a leak because we know Skyrim will end up on everything. Every version of
Yeah.
Skyrim will end up on everything at some point. Um, it again, people would probably assume that this is in response to Starfield getting pushed out, but again, this is something that would have had in the works. This is probably, if anything, this is probably a decent announcement they planned for the Game Fest or the Xbox show. That's getting leaked a little bit ahead of time. It's Skyrim. It's been Anniversary Edition is going to be on the Switch.
I think this is what, the 15th, 17th. I don't even know what iteration of the release of this game it's been, but it's one of those things where everybody joked about at the delay. Well, maybe we'll see another port of Skyrim this year, kind of, tongue-in-cheek jokes. But then again, it is something that could be done. And again, I have a Switch. I have Skyrim on the Switch. I'm not sure if I'm going to go out and spend more money, on the Anniversary Edition upgrade, but maybe I will if I need something to play on the Switch in the meantime. Again, it does work. They're going to make money off of this Switch release without a doubt. So, people can joke all they want about it. Skyrim is still that game at this point, for lack of better words to put it. Until we get that Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield or wherever fills that void for, I think, the Bethesda fan base in terms of this kind of game, Skyrim just remains to be this game that is just played indefinitely. I mean, we've seen it with other games. We've seen it with past Elder Scrolls games. We've seen it with games like Grand Theft Auto that have just had this unfortunate, had to be that game for 10 years because it is the only game in the franchise. But I think even if Skyrim didn't have this much of a gap, in between its next release, I still think that Skyrim is one of those games that just has that kind of longevity on its own, without that kind of, lack of content. I think it's something that you could just keep playing and playing, and that's something I've definitely played a ton myself. So again, maybe not the most exciting news here in terms of new releases, but it is something that is kind of expected and something to look forward to. And again, why not have it on Switch? I love Skyrim. I'm not mad that Switch is coming out again. It's not like, oh, another Skyrim release. No, why not? Of course. But maybe not the most refreshing or new news we can get. But there unfortunately are more rumors leaking out from this Xbox conference. I'm not sure. Maybe fortunate for our discussion here this week, but unfortunate for what, surprises on what's to come. But we also have another article here going over Gears of War. So Gears of War is being rumored. This is not confirmed. There's no rating or anything like that, but rumored to be getting a Master Chief Collection style collection like Halo has gotten in past years. So what I mean by that is, if you're not familiar with the Master Chief Collection, basically is a collection of the original Halo trilogy games that featured the Master Chief as the protagonist. And here the rumor is seeming to be a Gears of War original trilogy remaster package in the same vein. So maybe calling that a Marcus Phoenix collection could be a way to package that. But basically, just having that protagonist of the first three games, kind of rounding that up as the core, Gears of War original experience, if you will. But again, that's a game franchise that has always been core to the Xbox's identity. And when you have a year where I feel like not even just a year, we've been waiting for the last 2-3 years from Xbox. This is the year where all these new IPs are coming out. This is the year, and we're still just getting. Don't get me wrong. I think Halo's had its issues, but I've always been a big Halo fan myself. I've always been a Gears fan, but it's tough to when all that you have in lieu of these delays, which were only really there because of the acquisition of Bethesda in the first place, that you now have no new titles this year again, and you're looking at a remaster package. I don't want to knock the remaster package. It's something I'm actually probably would look into getting a 4K upscaled, really nice running version of the Gears of War games. I think that'd be great. But then again, it is tough when the only thing you can fill in this year are these remasters and these ports of these older series. Again, not knocking these ports whatsoever and these remasters. I think they're awesome. And I think I'd love to keep seeing more remasters of games that kind of fallen into time, the sands of time, and really haven't been able to come back in a way that they're preserved for longevity. So I'm not anti remaster in any way. I kind of like a lot of these older games being remastered. That being said, I'm hoping there are some other surprises, but it may just be like you said, where 2023 is like just getting all of the, or 2024 maybe even just getting all of these games that have been delayed and stacked on the past few years, because we have so much that's like right there on the precipice, but just isn't there this year, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why, but for some reason I'm picturing Gears of War, Phoenix Rising, or something like that for the title. I
That
played
could
the
be
first
great.
Gears of War, and I
Mm,
think I played the second, but I don't remember it. So I mean, this is totally one
mm,
of those things where if it shows up on Game Pass, I would 100% download it and probably play through the whole thing because I've got some vague memories of it, and it would be fun to sit and play through, especially getting to play through it on PC
hmm.
if it comes to the PC Game Pass. So, uh, I mean, nothing bad from me about it. It would just, you know, it'd be
Yeah,
fun to
same
play. It
here.
makes sense to play.
Absolutely. I mean, I played Gears. I don't think I played Gears 1 actually, but I played Gears 2 and 3, and I was a fan of the series at the time for sure. But I think that having that all in one package, and again, maybe playing Gears 1 and getting a little more context for the story of the universe, I think that'd be a really cool way to re-experience Gears in a new light. But going back onto the topic of, new announcements, unfortunately, we don't have a ton of news, yet for this. I'm sure we'll have a lot in the summer to talk about soon and further endless reports. But jumping into something that's surprised me this week, I did not think was going to be something to expect this year. The Witcher, that remaster of that next gen upgrade remaster, of that game. It was the 7th anniversary of that game this year, so that game's been out for quite a while. It's coming out this year, according to CD Projekt Red. I'm saying that very surprised because I think almost maybe a little over a month ago we had an announcement from them that was basically discussing, like you had said earlier in the show, about Cyberpunk's status and how that had kind of pushed back the next gen Witcher remaster a bit, and the next Witcher game, Witcher 4 or whatever it'll be called in general, has been pushed back, but has been announced as well. So I think that, and that's at very early stages of development as far as I'm aware. So this is something that surprised me after them kind of saying that after all the setbacks with Cyberpunk, and I think the developers kind of wanted to clarify here about that report last month, basically saying that while there were concerns about the next gen version being moved internally, it was first being handled by another studio, and they're not taking it in first party to handle that within CD Projekt Red. And a lot of people thought that the game may have been like in quote unquote development hell because of the way it had been moved and shelved like that. But to the contrary, they've actually came out and said that this is not the case whatsoever, and that they actually just needed that time to reformat. They're thinking about it and how much time it was going to take them to finish the remaster. And after that, that last month of them reformatting, they've decided that they only need about 15 members of the team to continue this project, and that they're confident that'll be enough to get it out this year. So they're saying they have a small portion of the team working on it, and they had the rest of their team working on Cyberpunk as well as moving on to their future projects, and it's not affecting anything else. So if that's the case, that's pretty exciting. I was always a fan of the Witcher series. However, I was never really able to get into them as much as I'd wanted to, which kind of bothered me because I loved RPGs. Obviously, I love Skyrim, Fallout, those series. And there was something about the Witcher's style. Again, I played The Witcher 2. Very different game from The Witcher 3. Not open world in the same sense. Not as branching in some ways, but I do think that the Witcher series in with a new coat of paint, with a new perspective for me, since it's been a while since I played the Witcher series, and maybe I wasn't really gripping it, grasping it at the time. So I think that to go back to that, next gen 4K 60, whatever it will be, I think that'll be awesome. And that's pretty much it for Xbox and third party. But we do have one last game announcement here, and I'll get that set up for a second. But I want to hear your thoughts on that first before we move on The Witcher.
I mean, again, in this case, I wouldn't say no. I mean, remasters. I know there's been some talk that they're remastering a game that isn't that old,
Mm,
2014 ish. But I mean, technology has come quite a far way since then, so I'm not opposed to getting a better quality version.
mhm.
Again, as much as this would have been my thing, 12, 13 years ago, I'll probably not have any time to even like. I have friends that tell me that this is, a pinnacle game that I need to play,
Mhm,
and I've only
mhm.
ever been able to get 2 or 3 hours into it before I get distracted, and then I
Yeah.
can't come back to it, and I come back to it, and it's like I might as well start over because I don't
That's how I
remember
feel
anything
about it
going
too.
on. So I mean, my concern again, is the people working on it. Are
Mhm.
they being aggressive? Is this going to have negative effects on the people working on it? Because unlike some speculation, I don't think I've ever heard, going back to Bethesda for a minute, I don't think
Mhm.
I've heard any reports of their studio really having any kind of crunch, pattern. Uh, the same can't be said for CD Projekt Red.
Yeah, not at all.
Especially
So,
Cyberpunk, they said they weren't going
mhm.
to do it, and they ended up doing it, and they tried to cover it up. So, again, my concern there is this a reaction to people being disappointed, so they're going to throw some people under the bus to get it done? I hope not.
Mhm.
It I don't have reason to think that, but that is where my mind goes. Just knowing the history there.
Yeah, and
We'll see. I mean, Jason Schreier will have a report if that's the case. Um,
But I think, they said it's a small team. They said it's about 15 people who are kind of working on this as like a side project, and the rest of the team is moving on or still continue on Cyberpunk or their next project. So again, like you said, that sounds good at first glance, but maybe, again, I hope that it's not too much pressure on this small team now to deliver on a lot of, iterative updates they need to make that maybe need more manpower on. I don't know if it's just 15 people. I don't know how many people will be needed to do. Again, every game is different. Every process is different. I'm sure the challenges they're facing. So again, that's just me, from the outside looking in, but I do think that it's definitely something to be concerned about for sure, especially with that studio's history. But I'm hoping for the best. It seems like they're getting things on track. Like you said, six months later from Cyberpunk's release, they were able to put that update out and really kind of get things where they're not maybe ideally as great as the Cyberpunk that was hyped up over like 10 years of all that hype cycle, which I think is also a contributing factor to that game's disappointment that people kind of forget that we were waiting so long for that game beforehand and it was going to be the next, world saving RPG, best RPG of all time type discussions around that game. So with that delivery plus all of that, I think a little bit too much hype going around it. I think that may be forgotten a little bit. So I think that they're at a state now where maybe it was in a state where probably would have launched really well and maybe still would have gotten criticized because of the overinflated hype about what it was supposed to be or could have been. But then that again, it just wasn't in a state period to even be in its best playable state like it was 6 months later. So that's besides the point. But I do hope that studio has learned, as the rest of the industry has seemingly learned from a lot of these mistakes, and I think that we're getting some better decisions going forward. Then again, it's tough to see when these things happen to other studios as well. I mean, we talked about other releases in the past year that it's tough when you see the same kind of mistakes happen repeatedly. But again, every game project's different, and it's not like you can always learn from the past when those other game projects has had different trajectories that maybe wouldn't have shown the same signs of issue that yours would. So again, I'm not a game director who's managed a project on that level like that where I wouldn't know what goes into that, but I really hope that CD Projekt can turn that around, learn from those mistakes, and have a good strategy going forward. But speaking of, this is our last story here today. Speaking of future 2022 releases, we have a bit of an announcement here from Sony. So, Sony Santa Monica actually gave us some updates on God of War Ragnarok's accessibility features. So, this week was actually Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And they took the opportunity of this day to showcase God of War a bit again by giving all these accessibility features and brief snippets of gameplay to kind of emphasize that as well. But it does kind of show us that this game, again, I can't internally imply when this game's going to come out just by this announcement, but I do think that what they're sticking with that 2022 release date. There hasn't been any news on the next PlayStation State of Play or what announcement show they'll have either for God of War or just a general summer show or maybe a later God of War shorter announcement. I'm not sure how they'll handle that, but with this announcement here, making it very clear that all these accessibility features are done and showing this gameplay that looks much better than the gameplay they showed last year even. I do think this game's in a state where it's very close to release, if not early 2023 if it had to get delayed. But this is the one where I'm holding out hope that it may not get delayed and this may be one of the big 2022 fall releases we actually do get.
Yeah, and I mean, on the topic of the accessibility itself,
Mm-hmm.
I I really wish there was some better way of standardizing accessibility, for games. I know uh, Last of Us 2 had some pretty extreme accessibility options. I
Mm-hmm.
think you could slow the game down. You had this coloring mode to make it easier to visually recognize, you know, and I'll touch on Elden Ring and the
Mm.
Souls games. I know a lot of
Hmm.
people get really uh, one way or the other when it comes to
Particular, right?
easy modes and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Um, so I I want to make it, it's tough writing that line between what's accessibility and what's easy mode.
Hmm.
I know I don't know. In general, I'm I'm personally all for everything you can do to make the game more accessible. And I know
Me
in
too.
this example, in the screenshot we've got clear color differentiation.
Yeah.
There's probably gonna be colorblind modes for all the various like colorblind profiles.
Hmm.
Um, subtitles, captions. There's just
I'm showing some
anything
of that here.
anything we can do to get games in more people's hands that couldn't have had those experiences before. They might not be the 100% as the original creators intended it, but man, being able to get 70% of that experience is
100%.
huge.
Is huge,
So
huge. Yeah. And I think that for everyone who complains about, well, like especially the Elden Ring is perfect, a perfect example because there's that whole culture of, well, if you didn't do it this way, or you use this summons, or you use these healing tools, or whatever, then you didn't really beat that character the right way, or So when you have conversations like that, I'm all for friendly competition. I think that's what gaming's best features is about, is having that competition. So, I'm not by all means, no means saying that you can't have those kind of one-on-one comparisons of can you beat this boss the way I can, or whatever that may be. But I think people who are so strongly, opposed to other game modes being available, I don't think they really understand what the argument is here. It's not about taking it away from your accomplishment of completing on that mode with those difficulties. Again, that mode could still be there. In this case, it is there. All we're doing here is just making options here for people who wouldn't have been able to experience that game in the same way, or maybe not even in a big way at all, be able to, by adding accessibility features. There are people who have disabilities where they're not, maybe if they're they need subtitles in a game, or else they cannot experience the game if they're deaf, or things like that. And there are things like Xbox and Microsoft actually came out now with these new kind of adaptable
mhm.
PC and Xbox accessibility accessories, which was a little while back. But I think this is definitely important to note, that you could then maybe 3D print around or create new setups to make the control input just way easier for people in general, depending on different abilities of ways people can actually handle a controller or a keyboard that they may not be able to. So this is all about just getting these games into more people's hands. And I think once people understand that, I think that's something that, how could you argue with that? Of course, it's a great thing. I think that, of course, we want to be able to, of course, it's more work for the developers, but if you have the opportunity and the resources to be able to add all these options like these Sony studios have been doing, I think it's so awesome. And I think it's a great precedent to set that, again, maybe not every game can be ideal for everybody to play, and people are going to have their own preferences, again, when it comes to what games they want to play, or will be maybe more difficult for them than others. They'll make their own decision. But I do think that the more games that can enable this, especially these big blockbuster experiences that people really want to experience, I think that's awesome. And it just makes me happy that more people will be able to play this game than wouldn't have been able to if not. So I think it's overall an awesome thing. I think it's a great opportunity for PlayStation here to showcase that, especially on the day, making awareness for it. So I do think that, again, just being in these snippets they show of these dialogue are very, very brief, just to show off these new types of cutscenes and how the subtitles are working here. So you have footsteps approaching. So just giving basic action dialogue type subtitles there, which I guess weren't available in the first one. I'm not exactly sure, but like you said, The Last of Us, Uncharted, Naughty Dog has been really good about adding these options, and I think that Sony Santa Monica is hopping on that as
Yep.
well. And I think that's great.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, you could make again, God of War might be an important case, but you could make an argument that hey, having something that colors enemies a different color that makes them stand out from the environment to take some difficulty away from the game. And again, at the end of the day, then you don't turn it on. Like it's not these aren't features that are all enabled by default.
Yep.
It's in there if you need it. And I'm 32. 30 years from now, when I have more free time, I want to be able to dive back into The Witcher, those big RPGs that I had nothing but free time for when I was young. when I'm really old and I don't have any work to do anymore and I want to spend 12 hours, hopefully I'll be able to spend 12 hours.
Yeah.
I might need bigger captions, on my dialogue. I might need a mode that slows the game down 10% so I can react and get that same feeling of like I'm reacting to the attack. Yeah, I had a little bit more time to do it, but again, nobody is making anybody turn those features on.
Exactly.
So
And you turning them on yourselves, again, it depends on your perception. Maybe it's just as hard for you to do it with that, with that timing as the other person that's doing it with the original timing. And I think people who just, like you said, just don't turn them on then. Like it's not for you to to get upset about the quality of the game is diminishing or anything. I don't think it's taking anything away. So I don't I do wonder why people get so up in arms about that, but I do understand the difficulty argument. I just don't think that's the case here, and I don't think it's something you need to worry about. If you want to play it on that accepted difficulty or whatever you think is the ideal, you can do that. I mean, I think about movies, for example, when like Tenet was an example. Christopher Nolan was like, you need to see this movie on the big screen. It can't be, or a lot of directors were like, I don't want my movie being streamed. I don't want it released on this HBO day one movie deals. I want people to see them in theaters. And many filmmakers were very adamant about that. And someone who's as a film person myself, I agree with that for a lot of terms. A lot of movies I'd really want to give it, see it in theaters, see it on the big screen, give it that respect. That doesn't stop another person from watching it on a plane and taking, missing half the middle of the movie to eat a sandwich. Like, and they're still enjoying the movie. Who am I to? I can go in and say, oh, well, you didn't really get the same experience I did, or whatever. But what would that benefit me or them at all? It's just about everybody enjoying things the way they want to enjoy them. And I'm not saying that. That's maybe not the best example because that's almost implying that it's like a choice. Because in most cases, this is not a choice for people about how they get to experience these games. It's either they get to experience them the way they can, or they're just out of there, or they just can't experience them. So I think that when you have it in that context of like people are thinking it's like a matter of taste, and it's like maybe it is from terms of tech size for some people if they just want certain features on. I love playing with my settings all the time. I'm one of those people. I love adjusting everything, but I don't think people understand it's not always a matter of choice for people, and these are things that can really just benefit people to actually having an experience they wouldn't have had beforehand. So when it comes to that, again, I'll leave it at that. I think it's one of those things where it's nothing but a positive, and you can separate yourself from that positive. If you don't want to experience those features, then by all means do it your way and have that, raw experience, whatever you think that the ideal is for you.
Yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the times these accessibility options aren't, they aren't there to make the game easier. They're there to make the game an appropriate level of challenge for the person playing. The goal is that, I find it difficult playing real time, no modifications, everything's just as it is, and someone else will get a similar level of difficulty with one or more options turned on. And again, it's unless you're using it as a competition, and thankfully, I mean, honestly, Dark Souls and the Soulsborne games are the only games that I really know of that people really have that stance for.
Yeah, I think that's why it's coming back a bit with Elden Ring, because I haven't heard that as adamant as when it's been right now with Elden Ring. So I think that's kind of why it's resurging.
Yeah, and I mean, you could definitely make an argument for a competitive, going to like a competitive shooter, for example. You could make an argument that accessibility options might cause some problems there, and that would be a separate discussion at that point. But especially for games like this, generally any single player game, I would be all in favor. If you want a single player game that just has a story mode and like you literally can't die and it's just a power fantasy the whole way through, like do it. That's what cheat codes used to be for, like just do it. It's a single player. It's how you get to experience it. And again, I just go back to, all these accessibility features, they're not built for making the game easier. They're built for giving people an option to experience it how they, at the challenge level they're going to find, hopefully reasonable. Because games are like the only entertainment medium that you can buy and have and like fail to experience. Like you could just stop reading a book, but in most cases that's because the book's bad. It'd be the equivalent of the game just being bad. Like there are some games that have certain sequences that you without some kind of change, you just might be incapable of beating, and you will never see, the remaining 20% of that game. And that's not really a case with books or movies. You can just
Mhm.
rewind a movie and watch it. Like
Or skip a
you can,
page or do something. If you know
right.
if you know how to read that book already, you can maybe you don't understand a part, you can move on. I can think of the few games where maybe I was younger and there was that one level where I was like, what is
Hmm.
going on? How could a kid beat this level? I'd be saying about how could I even do this? And there'd be games that I would love those games that I would just stop on a certain level when I was younger just because I didn't know what to do. And then those games I would never play again. Maybe I'll come back, fail on that level again, get frustrated, and be like, forget this game. Let me move on to something else. So I do think, like you said, there's a difference between difficulty when it comes to competition and when it comes to just how the right feel of a game. If you can handle that difficulty, how it should feel to you. But accessibility again is inherently a different word. It means to let that access to whoever needs that access to these features to be unlocked. So I think the more you blend adding abilities like in-game abilities to the accessibility features as synonymous. I don't think that's as helpful to the discussion as those people that are saying that think, because I think that they are just very separate. And when you go down that road, it can be a slippery slope. It's like, okay, well, what if I add mods to my Skyrim game? Like Elden Ring is not a single player game. Like, it's a single player game. It has online elements, but it's essentially a single player, experience. So if I'm playing Skyrim with mods on, and maybe I have, a little more inventory space so I can carry more items, or I have higher damage on my weapons, or I skipped a few levels so I can level up. Does that really, really make me a fake Skyrim player if I'm putting in hundreds of hours in this character that I just put all these mods on and my favorite armors or what have and kind of just played through the way I wanted to play it? Again, it's a single player experience. I don't really think that's a, affecting the integrity of the Skyrim experience for other people. You could make the argument that maybe you should play the game through base with no mods and do this first before to really get the true experience. But again, the true experience with any medium when it comes to video gaming is very hard to pinpoint when every experience is going to be different from the ground up when it's an RPG especially. So it's like you at the end of the day you make your own, and to each their own. I don't think anyone should have to worry about or get angry about that other people are enjoying what they're enjoying. I think it's comes to one of those things where if it's esports and it's in that kind of competition setting, those rules will be worked out, and the people that are playing there will be able to, work out at the competition level or whatever that may be. But I don't think that gives people the right to then go after or get angry about other people getting accessibility options when all it's only helping them and it's not hurting anyone else's experience. So that's my final gist on the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's, again, I don't think in general, I would say 99% of the time, I'm going to be all for any accessibility options, developers want to add. If anything, I
Mm-hmm.
wish there was like a condensed list of minimum things you should do for accessibility. And in some ways there are, colorblind modes,
Mm-hmm.
again, captions, there, if you look, you don't have to go far on Google to find like best practices for
Yeah.
making captions readable and standards for captions and,
Mm-hmm.
colorblind modes and like the most recommended colorblind profiles to have options for because of the statistical percentage that people are red green or whatever colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
um I mean, again, if anything, I wish there was more standardization and more pushing for it, because I
I agree.
think gaming is just one of those things that needs to be experienced by more people.
Mm-hmm.
um so
Yeah, I think gaming has a lot of, it's tough. Like when you think about, I don't want, I don't want to lose my train of thought here, but I'm thinking about some. Okay. I lost my train of thought there. All I was gonna say was when when gaming has these limits when it comes to whether it's interest, whether it's time. There are a lot of people who aren't like anti-gaming. But they kind of block it off as a thing that they can do because they see it as something that takes a certain kind of effort or has a certain stigma to what involvement you can or cannot have with it. And I think if people just realize if we just emphasize more and more, and I think this happens a lot with VR, and I think we might have mentioned this, but there's an Oculus Quest commercial, or where it's not even Oculus anymore. It's this Meta Quest now, but where they're kind of like, well, you can work out on this, and it's not just for gamer nerds. Gaming is for everybody. And I'm like, all right, well, you could maybe say that in a different way, where you're not giving this negative stigma to gaming being like this only only for niche subjects. When gaming is really, I think the word gaming at times can do that the same thing, because gaming is really not just just these genre or even the form of game we're talking about here, but it's basically any interactive media almost that goes through these very broad formats, like what constitutes a game, whether it's a score or a competition or it's just a narrative. I mean, the definition of that has been so broad, and it's not, times have changed where I don't think gaming is something that is seen as just a child's, toy or something like that. We've grown up where people have grown up with gaming now, and it's not just something that like only kids are playing with. We have the majority of gamers being in like the 18 to 30, 30, the age demographic now. It's not a majority child market, and it's also the majority of adult entertainment market in the entire world now. It's the biggest media industry outright, and I think I said this before, but I think everywhere else in media, maybe in film and TV and other areas, I think they're starting to realize that this integration with interactive media and gaming in general is kind of the future of a lot of entertainment. So, long story short, there, I just feel like I think that, like you said, there should be more standards to this outright, just to get more people into gaming, and not even just these standards when it comes to. I feel like there are things that are overlooked. Just we talk about colorblind things, filters and captions, but what about just controller layouts? I mean, we have games that, I mean, today we talk about, console games getting all these kind of PC traditionally features where you can actually adjust performance modes and things like that. And we're all saying, great, let's get that on every game. Let's have the options. Versus there's that idea of consoles give simplicity, but I don't want simplicity when it comes to not having options in that deep menu. If I want to go to that menu and change all of my control schemes, that may be the only way I can actually play the game properly in the way I want to play it. So I don't know why every game wouldn't have. This should be a standard on every game now. Wouldn't have a remap option or a macro. I think that's not an option on most games, actually, when it comes to PlayStation. At least for me, the games I play on PlayStation, I can't find many games where I could adjust every macro. It's like, oh, you can have, there's a couple of control schemes you could swap through, or maybe you can swap the triggers, you swap the crouch or something like that, but they don't have fully adaptable button mapping. And I'm not sure why that wouldn't be the case unless it's really, I understand it's all extra work. I get it. But I think when you talk about accessibility mainstays, I think that should be like the bare minimum for accessibility. I do think we're getting to the point where if you're going to really say that's what you want to do, then you don't even offer a way for maybe people to use alternative control schemes and stuff like that. It's not really, it's kind of like one of those ground level things you have to fix first before all these other accessibility features can maybe work. That's depending on the person 100%, but I do think that should be considered an essential in terms of control schemes and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I've never understood why consoles don't, especially when they have PC ports that have to allow rebinding anyway. Like, I feel like a majority of the work's there. It'd be more designing the user interface to support it. But again, if you get, option menus in general are pretty standardized. You have your graphic options, your audio options. If you're on PC, you have your control options. It's like, even then, like a lot of the UI design you do once and you could just reuse that same, like how you rebind controls on a controller would pretty much be the same for every game. I do want to say that you briefly brought up VR, and it's fascinating to me because VR is one of those, is a, method of playing games that has even more restrictions as far as like, who can play it, because if you get motion sick, you can't play it for long. Granted, playing it does help get over it, and you can essentially build VR legs to get around it. But there's so many different ways of doing different things to help people get through, and a lot of people have strong opinions on like in VR. You have smooth locomotion, which is where you move with an analog stick like you would on a gamepad, and you move around the space, and then you have physically moving around the space, and you have teleporting, and then when you have teleporting, you have options for does the screen go black? How fast does it go black? There's just so much that a really good VR game does to make that work. But then you always end up with people that are, on one side of the fence, like, oh, if you're teleporting, then you're not really playing the game because you're not moving around the space. You're teleporting around enemies. And again, it's just like, they just don't do it. Like, you don't have to do it. That's not. It's just it's an even stricter, it's an even less accessible option for playing games, which I really do hope one day we can get around a lot of those limitations, because I love VR.
Me too.
I think it's one of the greatest ways to play games, especially when they're built for it. But it's just, again, accessibility is taken to a whole nother level with it. So
Absolutely. And just to kind of wrap that up, I think, I agree. I love VR. I'm excited to see what's coming for VR this year. I think it's the one thing I forgot to talk about with Sony there with the accessibility and their upcoming summer announcements, but they're pushing VR for this fall. I think that's still very much happening. There's a not even rumored, it's an announced
Mhm.
Horizon game coming to VR, so I'm not sure how it's going to work. And there were some other rumors about other studios that are announcing they have a partnership with PlayStation VR. So that's something that's coming this summer. I don't want to. I could go all the way, and delve into that topic as well, my predictions and things like that. But I do think that VR is here to stay, and not only that, but it's here to. I think VR is going to have like a renaissance coming. I think the Quest, the new version of the Quest as well. They're even coming with a commercial version of the Quest, which I believe is not going to be used for gaming at all, and be used for other features like exercise or corporate feature. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work because that's not my expertise, but that'll be interesting to see. But I think a lot of stuff on the horizon for VR, and I think that the more I hear about this kind of stuff, especially accessibility and things like that, I think the more developers and just consumers in general are aware about these features, what they're looking for in both VR and just gaming in general, about how this is going to be accessible and how we're gonna do these the right way going forward. So I'm excited. I know I've probably spoken a mouthful about that, but I'm excited for all of it, and I think there's a lot of good stuff to come. I think we've been in a lot of delay world and it's no game, not a ton of big releases, but I think that a lot's coming this fall, and I think especially 2023. I think it's going to be a huge resurgence year for gaming, a huge year. So I'm
Yep.
I'm optimistic about a lot for sure.
Yep. Let's just get through 2022 and
Exactly.
see
We'll,
what's see what's
we'll
coming
see
down
how
the
it goes.
pipeline.
I think maybe we'll have some surprises here. We'll check back on our further endless reports, but I think in the coming weeks we'll see what June brings us. I know we had these leaks here. I know a lot of it's kind of up in the air, but I'm sure we'll have some interesting stuff to talk about come June.
Yep.
Absolutely. Well, Ben, I think that's about it for us. I want to thank everybody again for watching, whoever is watching, and thank you all again for joining us. We will be back for the next endless report. Is there anything you want to add, Ben, before we sign off today?
Uh, Not really. I'm excited to get closer and closer to Summer Game Fest and Xbox's actual event.
Same here. I'm looking forward to Game Fest. I'm looking forward to Xbox. Maybe something from Sony and Nintendo. We'll see. No announcements yet. But for now, keep gaming, keep making games. We appreciate you joining in. And thanks so much for tuning into Endless Report. Take care.